He was a millionaire with everything money could buy, except happiness. When Rick Miller returned to his small hometown after years in New York, he thought it was just for business. But what he found was something no fortune could ever replace: love, legacy, and the true meaning of wealth. Stay with us, this story will touch your heart in ways you'll never forget. Rick Miller sat in his Manhattan office, skyscrapers towering around him like glass giants. His phone buzzed, and for a moment, he considered ignoring it. Business always came first. But when he saw the name of his family lawyer flash across the screen, his chest tightened. He answered, bracing himself, and the words struck like a hammer. "Rick, your father has passed away." The world outside his office window suddenly felt cold and distant. The news rattled him in a way no corporate crisis ever had. Rick had built an empire, bought penthouses, and closed billion-dollar deals. But now he was simply a son who had lost his father. He hadn't spoken much to his dad in years, their relationship fractured by Rick's decision to leave Franklin behind. The guilt pressed heavier than any boardroom responsibility. In that moment, the empire he'd built seemed meaningless compared to the silence left behind. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid as though it held answers. Memories of Franklin flashed: his father's laughter, the smell of the vineyards in summer, Emily's smile when they were teenagers. He shook his head, dismissing the flood of emotions. He told himself it was just business, just another responsibility to handle. But deep down, he knew this trip back home would stir more than he was prepared for. Rick's driver asked if he should book the jet to Nashville. "Yes," Rick replied flatly, though his voice carried a tremor he couldn't hide. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a man who controlled so much could suddenly feel so powerless. A storm brewed within him, one that no deal, no check, no amount of success could quiet. The flight back to Tennessee would not just be a journey across miles, but across time. If Rick's story already touched your heart in these first moments, imagine what's yet to come. Don't miss the journey. Subscribe now and join us as we discover what true wealth really means. The road into Franklin was lined with golden autumn leaves, their colors blazing against the gray sky. Rick drove himself this time, preferring the hum of the old rental car to the silence of a chauffeur. The town hadn't changed much: same diner with its chipped sign, same church steeple reaching toward the heavens. But what had changed was him. He was no longer the small-town boy people once knew. He was Rick Miller, millionaire, outsider. As he pulled up to Main Street, heads turned. Old neighbors whispered as he walked past, their eyes filled with curiosity, suspicion, even a hint of resentment. Rick felt the weight of their stares, remembering the day he'd left with a promise never to return. Now, he was back. But not as a prodigal son, more like a stranger in a familiar land. The town had not forgotten, and forgiveness was far from guaranteed. The Miller house stood proudly at the edge of the vineyards, though it looked tired, worn by years without his father's strong hands to care for it. Rick stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply, the scent of grapes still lingering in the crisp air. It hit him harder than he expected: the nostalgia, the ache of belonging, the ghost of everything he had left behind. For the first time in years, he felt small again. Inside, the silence was overwhelming. Dust coated the shelves, photographs hung crooked, and the air carried the faint smell of oak barrels and aged wine. He ran his fingers over a framed picture of himself and his father from decades ago, the smiles wide, the bond unbreakable, or so he had thought. Now only echoes remained, reminding him of promises broken and time wasted. Rick clenched his jaw, fighting the sting of regret. He walked toward the study, where piles of documents awaited him. Legal papers, deeds, contracts, reminders that this wasn't just a homecoming, it was business. Yet beneath the weight of ink and paper, his heart tugged at something deeper. This wasn't just about property or money. It was about legacy, roots, and the quiet whispers of a father's memory calling him home. The Harvest Festival filled Franklin with laughter, music, and the smell of roasted corn. Rick walked through the crowd, feeling both welcomed and judged, every glance reminding him of how much he had changed. The stalls were colorful, children ran with cotton candy, and old neighbors nodded politely. Though he was physically present, His heart remained guarded, afraid to be seen as vulnerable. It was in this atmosphere that his past suddenly confronted him. Standing near the school booth, Emily Johnson smiled as she handed books to children. Her auburn hair glowed beneath the festival lights, and her laughter rang like a melody Rick had almost forgotten. For a moment he froze, unsure whether to approach or walk away. The years between them melted in a heartbeat, and suddenly she looked exactly as she did in his memories, only wiser, stronger, and even more beautiful. When Emily finally noticed him, her expression shifted from surprise to a cautious smile. "Rick Miller," she said, her voice both familiar and distant, as if trying to bridge 2 decades in a single breath. He stammered, unprepared, realizing that no business deal had ever made him this nervous. Emily's presence reminded him of the boy he used to be, and the man he had become felt suddenly exposed. Their conversation was polite, circling around small talk, her work as a teacher, his busy life in New York. Yet beneath the words lingered unspoken truths, questions and emotions neither dared to voice. Emily's eyes held both kindness and hurt, and Rick sensed she hadn't forgotten the day he left Franklin behind. For the first time in years, silence between them felt heavier than words. As the festival lights flickered, Rick realized that this meeting was not a coincidence. It was the beginning of a test, one that would challenge not only his choices, but also his heart. He walked away unsettled, aware that Franklin had more in store for him than paperwork and inheritance. And Emily was now the thread connecting his past to his uncertain future. The following morning, Rick drove to the vineyards, the place where his childhood had been shaped. The land stretched wide and proud, rows of vines glowing under the autumn sun. Yet, what once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like contested ground. At the entrance, James Miller waited, his arms crossed and his smile sharp as glass. Their eyes met, and tension immediately filled the air, unspoken rivalries resurfacing. "Rick," James said, his tone laced with sarcasm, "welcome back. Didn't think the city boy remembered where he came from." Rick forced a calm smile, though he felt the hostility. James had aged into a man hardened by work and resentment, his hands rough from years on the vineyard. Unlike Rick, James had stayed carrying the family burden alone, and he wanted Rick to remember it. Their differences stood like a wall between them. As they walked through the fields, James wasted no time. He spoke of offers from outside investors, deals that could bring millions if they sold the land. "This town is dying, Rick," James insisted. "You don't belong here anymore. Take the money and go back to your skyscrapers." His words carried not only bitterness, but also temptation. To Rick, it was the easy way out, yet something deep within him resisted. Rick clenched his fists, his father's letter echoing in his memory, though James didn't know he had it. "This land is more than money," Rick said firmly, surprising even himself. James laughed coldly, mocking Rick's sudden sentiment. The exchange ended with both men standing on opposite sides, the vineyard between them like a battlefield waiting for war. Old wounds had reopened, and the fight was only beginning. Driving back through Franklin, Rick felt torn. James's words echoed like poison, feeding his doubts about whether he truly belonged in this place. Yet the image of Emily at the festival, her smile both fragile and warm, whispered of a life worth fighting for. The conflict between heart and fortune had begun to take root, and Rick knew he could no longer hide from the choice that awaited him. That evening, Rick entered his father's study, the air heavy with dust and memories. On the desk lay envelopes, legal documents, and one sealed letter with his name on it. His hands trembled as he opened it, recognizing his father's handwriting. The words inside were simple, yet powerful. "Protect the land. Protect the people. Our roots are worth more than gold." Rick felt the weight of a legacy pressing on him. His father's voice seemed to echo in the room, reminding him of days spent walking the vineyard rows. Rick closed his eyes, recalling lessons about patience, honor, and responsibility. He realized that while he had chased skyscrapers, his father had safeguarded the soil beneath his feet. The letter was not just an instruction, it was a plea for Rick to return to who he truly was. The emotions cut deep. Rick folded the letter carefully, placing it back on the desk like a sacred relic. He wondered why his father hadn't said these words while alive, but perhaps he had known Rick wouldn't listen then. Now the message felt like a challenge, one Rick could not ignore. The empire in New York suddenly felt shallow compared to the roots waiting in Franklin. He felt both inspired and trapped. The weight of decision pressed harder than any deal he had signed in his career. Should he abandon the city life he built, or could he find a way to honor both worlds? The letter didn't give answers, only a command to protect. Rick's mind raced with possibilities and fears, knowing James would never support his father's wishes. Conflict was brewing and time was running out. He left the study with the letter in his pocket, the night colder than before. Outside, the vineyard stretched into the darkness, silent yet alive with history. Rick whispered into the wind, as though his father could hear, "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." But deep inside, a seed had been planted, one that would soon grow into a battle for heart and home. The next morning, Rick decided to visit the local school where Emily worked. Children laughed in the yard, their joy untainted by the weight of adult concerns. Emily stood at the door, her smile soft as she greeted students. For a moment, Rick hesitated, watching her with admiration he couldn't quite hide. She had built a life of purpose here, something money had never given him. When she saw him, her expression was cautious but warm. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, tilting her head curiously. Rick shrugged, admitting he wanted to see how she had built her world in Franklin. Emily showed him around, pointing out murals painted by students and projects funded by community donations. Rick realized her life was rich, not in wealth but in meaning and love. It struck him deeply. Their conversation flowed more easily than at the festival. They laughed about childhood memories, sneaking into the orchards, racing down Main Street, and dreaming about the future. But when Emily asked about New York, Rick's answers felt hollow, even to himself. He spoke of deals, luxury, and power, but her gentle eyes reminded him of what he had lost. For the first time, he wondered if success had cost too much. As they walked back outside, Rick noticed the town's simplicity through Emily's eyes. The children's laughter, the sense of community, and the way everyone knew each other's names, all of it created a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Emily teased him gently, saying, "You don't smile like that in the city, do you?" Rick chuckled, but the truth pierced his heart. She was right. Before leaving, Emily placed a hand on his arm. "Franklin isn't just a place, Rick. It's a part of who you are. Don't forget that." Her words lingered long after he drove away. For the first time, Rick felt torn between the man he had become and the boy who once dreamed under Tennessee skies. And in that tension, a fragile spark of hope began to grow. Back in his temporary office, Rick's phone buzzed with urgent calls from New York. His partners demanded answers, contracts were pending, investors impatient, and deadlines closing in. The city pulled at him with relentless force, reminding him of the empire he had built. Yet Franklin's silence, the vineyards, and Emily's words tugged at his heart with equal strength. He felt trapped between two worlds. During a video call, one partner leaned forward, frustration sharp in his voice. "Rick, this small-town detour can't drag on. We need you back in Manhattan. Focused." The pressure was undeniable, and Rick felt the walls closing in. He gave vague reassurances, promising he'd return soon. But even as he said it, a part of him resisted. Franklin wasn't just business anymore, it was becoming something deeper. He pored over the documents stacked on his desk, deals worth millions resting in his hands. The numbers dazzled, yet the weight of his father's letter pressed harder. How could he focus on profit when his roots, his family's legacy, and perhaps his future with Emily were at stake? His mind replayed her words. "Franklin is part of who you are." That truth gnawed at him with every passing hour. That night, Rick walked alone through the vineyards, the moonlight casting silver across the rows of vines. He thought of his father, of lessons about patience and care, of Emily's steady strength. Each step on the soil reminded him this was home, whether he admitted it or not. The land seemed to whisper promises of peace and belonging, things Manhattan had never given him. Still, doubt weighed heavy. Rick looked up at the stars, brighter here than anywhere in New York. He realized he couldn't avoid the choice forever, soon he would have to decide. But tonight, he let the silence comfort him, reminding him there was life beyond contracts and skyscrapers. Somewhere in that silence he found strength. Yet the looming shadow of New York remained, threatening to pull him back at any moment. Days later, Rick overheard a conversation that chilled him. James was on the phone, his voice sharp, discussing offers with outside investors. He promised quick sales, large profits, and the end of Franklin's traditions. Rick's chest tightened as anger boiled within him. His cousin wasn't just impatient, he was betraying the very land their family had bled for. It was a dagger aimed straight at their heritage. Confronting James only deepened the rift. "These vineyards are not yours to sell," Rick said, his voice steady but burning. James smirked, dismissing him with a wave. "You left, remember? This land stayed with me. Don't pretend you care now." The words cut deep, exposing Rick's years of absence. Guilt stung, but anger burned stronger. For the first time, Rick felt a clear line drawn between them. News of James's dealings spread quickly through the town. Neighbors whispered in worry, afraid outsiders would strip Franklin of its traditions. The community looked at Rick with wary hope, as though expecting him to defend them. The weight of their eyes was heavy, a responsibility he hadn't chosen but could no longer ignore. Rick knew silence would make him complicit. He had to act. That evening, Emily found him pacing outside the vineyard office. "What's wrong?" she asked softly, sensing the turmoil. Rick explained everything: James's schemes, the threat to Franklin, the pressure from New York. Emily listened, her eyes filled with both sorrow and faith. "You have to decide, Rick. Are you going to fight for this place or let it slip away?" Her voice carried both challenge and encouragement. Rick stood in silence, the autumn wind rustling around them. He realized James wasn't just his rival, he was the embodiment of everything Rick feared about himself: greed, ambition, and abandonment. To save Franklin, Rick would need more than money or business skills. He would need courage, heart, and the willingness to sacrifice. And for the first time, he wondered if he was ready. Rick sat alone in the vineyard office, papers scattered across the desk. New York contracts gleamed with promises of power, while Franklin's future weighed heavy in his father's letter. He felt pulled apart, one half craving security, the other longing for purpose. The silence of the room pressed against him, demanding a choice he wasn't ready to make. His heart thudded louder than the ticking clock. That evening, he met Emily at the cafe on Main Street. She looked at him with gentle eyes, but her words were firm. "Rick, where do you belong? With skyscrapers or with your roots?" The question pierced him deeper than he expected. He wanted to answer, but the truth wavered on his lips. Emily saw his hesitation, and disappointment clouded her smile. "I can't keep waiting for you to decide," Emily said, her voice trembling but resolute. "This town, these people, they deserve someone who chooses them without doubt." She stood, her chair scraping softly against the wooden floor. Rick tried to stop her, but the weight of his silence spoke louder than any excuse. Emily walked away, leaving him shattered. Rick stayed seated long after she left, his coffee cold, his chest burning. For the first time, he realized how much Emily's belief in him mattered. Without her, Franklin felt lonelier than ever, the vineyards emptier, his father's words heavier. He had built an empire in New York, but it suddenly felt like ashes in his hands. His fortune could not fill the void she left behind. As he drove back to the vineyard, the night sky stretched endlessly above him. Emily's words echoed like a verdict. "Where do you belong?" Rick gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. He knew he had to make a decision soon. His heart demanded it, and Franklin depended on it. The cost would be high, but doing nothing would cost even more. The following week tested Rick like never before. James finalized meetings with investors, preparing to sell the vineyards. Meanwhile, New York partners demanded his return for a major signing. Pressure squeezed from both sides, threatening to crush him entirely. He walked the vineyard rows at dawn, the cold air biting, his mind torn between two futures. He felt the walls of his double life collapsing. In town, people whispered about James's plans. Some feared change, others hoped for quick profit. But all eyes turned to Rick, silently asking if he would defend their way of life. The responsibility weighed heavier than his million-dollar deals ever had. He realized Franklin no longer saw him as an outsider. They saw him as the last shield standing between them and destruction. Late one night, Rick found himself staring at his father's letter again. The words blurred with tears he refused to shed. "Protect the land. Protect the people," he whispered to the empty room. "How, Dad? How do I fight when I don't even know who I am anymore?" The silence gave no answer, only pressed him deeper into despair. He felt like a boy again, lost in shadows. The breaking point came when Emily avoided him at the festival grounds, walking past as if he were invisible. Her absence cut deeper than James's betrayal or the city's pressure. Rick realized that losing her meant losing the very anchor holding him to Franklin. The pain forced him to confront the truth. He could not keep living divided. A choice had to be made. That night, Rick stood on the porch of his family's house, the vineyard stretching endlessly before him. The stars burned bright above, as if demanding an answer. He clenched his fists and whispered, "Enough." For the first time, his heart aligned with his father's legacy. The boy who left Franklin was gone. The man who would fight for it was finally ready to rise. Rick called a town meeting at the old community hall, the wooden floors creaking beneath the crowd's anxious steps. Farmers, shopkeepers, and neighbors filled the room, their faces carrying years of history and hope. Standing at the front, Rick felt his heart pounding like a drum. He unfolded his father's letter, reading it aloud. The room grew silent, every ear straining to hear. Legacy, not profit, was his message. He spoke with a fire he hadn't known he carried. "This vineyard isn't just land, it's our heritage. If we sell it, we sell our soul." Murmurs filled the hall, some nodding, others skeptical. Rick explained his plan: modernize the vineyards with new technology while preserving traditions. Jobs would stay local, profits would remain in Franklin, and their history would be protected. His voice trembled, but conviction kept him strong. The crowd listened, their eyes shifting from doubt to cautious hope. For the first time, Rick wasn't speaking like a millionaire from New York, he was speaking like one of them. He promised transparency, fairness, and a future that respected their past. Emily, standing at the back, watched closely, her arms crossed. Rick felt her gaze like a test he needed to pass. James interrupted, sneering at Rick's promises. "Empty words from a man who abandoned this town years ago." His voice dripped with disdain, and tension rippled through the hall. Rick didn't flinch. Instead, he faced James squarely. "I may have left, but I came back, and I won't leave again." The strength in his words silenced the room, and James's smirk faltered. The meeting ended with mixed reactions, but a spark had been lit. People left whispering, hopeful yet uncertain. Rick knew winning their trust would take more than words, it would take sacrifice. As the hall emptied, Emily lingered, her expression unreadable. For the first time, Rick felt he had taken a step toward being the man his father believed he could be. The next day, James called for a shareholder meeting in the vineyard's office. The room filled with tension as papers stacked with offers from investors lay on the table. Rick entered with steady steps, his father's letter in his pocket. He wasn't just defending land, he was defending identity, family, and the future of Franklin. James's eyes burned with challenge. James began with numbers, painting a picture of wealth and security if they sold. Millions, instant stability, freedom from responsibility, he argued. The shareholders shifted uneasily, tempted by the promises. Rick waited, then stood. His voice was calm but resolute. "If we sell, we lose more than land, we lose ourselves. This vineyard is worth more than any check." The room fell silent at his conviction. He outlined his plan with clarity. Reinvest profits into the town, expand distribution while keeping ownership local, and honor traditions through festivals and education. He painted a vision of growth that preserved their roots, a future that honored both past and progress. His words stirred something deeper than numbers, pride, belonging, and identity. For the first time, the shareholders leaned in with genuine interest. James grew desperate, mocking Rick's idealism. "You think sentiment keeps the lights on? You'll ruin us!" But Rick didn't waver. He pulled out his father's letter, reading it aloud again. The words carried weight, echoing through the room like a final testament. Eyes softened, hearts shifted, and James's confidence began to crumble. Legacy triumphed over greed in that moment. When the vote came, the decision was clear. The majority sided with Rick, rejecting James's plan. James stormed out, his pride shattered, leaving Rick standing in the center of the room. Relief washed over him, though he knew the battle was far from over. For now, however, he had won a victory for Franklin and for himself. The vineyards were safe, at least for today. In the days following the vote, Rick's phone exploded with calls from New York. His partners demanded explanations, furious that he had delayed signing a major deal. Millions hung in the balance, and walking away would cost him dearly. Rick listened in silence, then calmly said, "I'm done." The line went quiet before the shouting began, but his mind was already made up. Turning down the deal meant more than financial loss. It meant severing ties with the life he had built. Manhattan's skyline, once his pride, now felt like a cage. He understood the cost, but also the freedom it brought. By sacrificing money and status, he gained something greater, the chance to honor his father's legacy and protect Franklin's heart. It was a trade his soul welcomed. Word spread quickly across town. Some were shocked he would give up so much, while others saw it as proof of his commitment. Emily heard the news at school and felt her chest tighten. For the first time, she realized Rick was no longer running from Franklin. He was choosing it, and by extension, choosing her. Hope flickered where doubt had lived. Rick walked the vineyards with the workers, rolling up his sleeves for the first time in years. Dirt clung to his hands, sweat stung his eyes, but he felt alive. Each vine reminded him of his father's words, each step a reminder of what he was fighting for. The sacrifice of wealth felt insignificant compared to the richness of belonging. Franklin wasn't just a duty, it was home. That night, sitting on the porch, Rick looked out at the horizon. The vineyard stretched wide under the stars, silent witnesses to his choice. He felt lighter, freer, though the road ahead would be difficult. The fortune he left behind was gone forever, but for the first time, he didn't care. What he had now was worth far more than money. The vineyards buzzed with new energy as Rick began his plans for renewal. Equipment was updated, workers received better pay, and community programs were launched to involve families. Franklin slowly shifted from fear to pride, seeing the land not as a burden but as a blessing. For the first time in years, hope flowed as freely as the wine barrels stored in the cellar. Emily visited the vineyard one afternoon, watching Rick from a distance as he worked alongside the staff. She saw a man transformed, not the millionaire from New York, but the boy she once knew, now grown and grounded. When he noticed her, his smile was genuine, unguarded. "You stayed," she said softly. He nodded. "For Franklin, for us." The words melted the last barrier between them. Their bond deepened as they walked the fields together, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future. Emily reminded him that healing the land was only part of the journey. He also had to heal himself. Rick listened, humbled, knowing she was right. With her by his side, the burden of responsibility felt lighter, the future brighter. Meanwhile, James had disappeared from the spotlight, his schemes exposed, his pride broken. Though his absence lingered like a shadow, the community slowly turned its back on him. Rick didn't celebrate his cousin's downfall. Instead, he felt pity. Ambition without love had consumed James, and Rick vowed never to follow that same path. His own redemption was proof that change was possible. As the sun set, Emily and Rick stood at the edge of the vineyard, the sky painted in fiery shades of orange and red. For the first time, Rick allowed himself to imagine a life rooted not in money, but in love and belonging. Emily slipped her hand into his and he squeezed it gently. Together they faced a horizon filled with promise, no longer as strangers, but as partners. The dawn broke gently over Franklin, painting the vineyards in shades of gold. Rick walked the rows in silence, the crisp morning air filling his lungs. Each vine, each leaf felt alive with history and hope. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing to meetings or chasing contracts. He was exactly where he belonged. The land embraced him as its rightful steward. Emily joined him, her steps quiet on the dewy grass. She slipped her arm through his, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. They walked together without words, their bond deeper than anything spoken. Rick felt the simple joy of her presence, something money could never buy. In her, he found both comfort and challenge, love and purpose. As the sun rose higher, workers began their day, waving as they passed. Rick greeted each one by name, his heart swelling with pride. Franklin no longer looked at him as the outsider who abandoned them. He was part of the community again, a leader not because of wealth, but because of heart. His father's legacy was alive, carried in every smile and every vine. Emily paused, turning to face him with a smile. "You've come full circle, Rick," she said softly. He nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I thought success was measured in money, but it's here in love, in family, in belonging." Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "Then you've finally found home." At that moment, Rick knew he had everything he needed. As the sun bathed the vineyards in light, Rick felt peace settle deep within him. He had sacrificed fortune but gained a life rooted in purpose and love. Emily squeezed his hand, and together they looked out at the endless rows of vines stretching into the horizon. The future was uncertain, but Rick no longer feared it. He had found his roots, and with them, his true wealth. Rick discovered that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in love, family, and the roots that shape us. And maybe that's a reminder for all of us. What did this story make you feel? Share your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to hear them. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspirational and emotional millionaire stories. Rick found that love and legacy are worth more than millions, and maybe that's true for all of us. What part of this story moved you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next emotional journey we share together.